Money Matters on Pure 107.8 FM, brought to you in association with the Vernon Building Society, Stockport's first choice for mortgages, savings and financial services. Find out more at www.thevernon.co.uk.
Welcome to Money Matters in association with the Vernon Building Society. I'm joined in our studio today by Ian Keeling from The Lender. And Ian, we are going to be talking about the cost of university, both in terms of tuition fees, but also the cost of living for students. And this will interest, well, not just parents who have students at university at the moment, but particularly those who have just done their GCSEs, those who are going through the A-level process. There's going to come a time when you might be asked for a bit of money.
And I think beyond that, I think even if you were planning a family or have very young children, it's a good time to start planning ahead. Best start early.
So let's look at the cost of the tuition fees themselves. And it's just worth explaining because things have changed so much over the last 5 and 10 years. The system, it almost seems to be changing on a yearly basis. It seems to have settled down now. What is it that people will be paying and when will they be asked to be paying this back?
Well, tuition fees are capped at £9,000 a year, so that's something we never used to be faced with, but now any student is going to be paying, on average, they say £8,425 a year for the course itself. And these are traditionally paid for through the student loan tuition fee loan scheme.
What has changed slightly in the last few years, though, is when you say the word tuition fee, you expect to be handed a bill. So after 3 years of study, there would be a bill for, now let's just get my maths right, 8, 16, 24?
Well, I would say capped at 27, that would be easy.
27, yeah. Wish I brought a calculator in there. Capped at £27,000. But tuition fees aren't like that. Somebody doesn't present you with a bill at the end of 3 years of study and say how you were paying, sir.
No. And I think if that were the case, then, at the moment we're seeing 40% of 19-year-olds going into higher education. That certainly wouldn't be feasible. So what actually happens is students apply for a loan and the tuition fees are paid directly to the university by the student loan company.
And how do they get to a point where they're going to be asked to pay those back?
Okay, so the loan itself is paid back once the student's working. So the graduate goes into work and only when they're earning more than £21,000 a year. So that £21,000 is at current rates expected to increase, obviously, as earnings increase. And at that point, anything over £21,000 a year in earnings is then 9% of that is then going to pay back the student loan.
That kind of makes it, and we're not being political here, but it does make it more affordable for the student. They don't need to think about £27,000 as a big bill to pay when they get out. It's a case of, could I afford 9% of a salary over £21,000 to pay off that debt? Yes, I think mentally the thing to think about is probably it more as a tax than a loan itself. So with a traditional loan, you think, I've got to pay all this back. With a tax, it's linked to earnings, say. So you're saying, well, if I go to university, then the likelihood I'm going to get a better job, I'm going to earn more. If I earn more, then some of my earnings is going to go back to pay for the cost of my education, which has led to that job in the first place. But what's probably worth noting is, unlike traditional loans, if you don't pay them, someone can come knocking on the door and all sorts of nasty things can happen. With a student loan, if you lost your job, if your income dropped, then you'd stop making a payment. So your payments would reduce in proportion to your income. And then one further thing is, after 30 years, if there's anything still owing, that's written off. So those safeguards mean that if you have the choice, if you had some inheritance, you had some money in the bank somewhere, you could actually hand over the money straight away rather than paying it over your salary over 30 years. It would probably make more sense to actually take the loan rather than paying the cash up front. Certainly in many cases it can make more sense. If you take, for example, the fact that what I said earlier, after 30 years the entire loan's written off and the repayments are only geared up for earnings over 21,000, then many of today's students will not pay the entire loan back. So you've got to make the consideration that it may be best just to leave the loan there. That said, if someone is a high earner and they are going to pay the loan back, then it is possibly better to pay it back. It really depends, and I think that's where you've got to look at the circumstances in each individual case. There are some online tools to help you with this sort of thing, but certainly taking the loan and not rashly paying the fees, that really could leave people a lot worse off. And that's because there is interest on these loans as well, so that plays its part as well in the calculation. Yes, the interest is linked to inflation.
I think previously it was just inflation, but now there is a margin above inflation. So we traditionally talk about RPI, Retail Price Index, plus 3% while a student's studying, and then once in work, to complicate things further, it's RPI plus up to 3% depending on the earnings. So there is an interest rate to be paid, so the debt will grow.
So that's what students are asked to pay in tuition fees, or can expect to pay back, I should say, in tuition fees over the course of their working life. That's not the only costs of going to university, though, and it's not just about the beer. It's about where you're going to live. It's about what you're going to eat. It's about the books that you're going to need to read. The cost of living needs to be factored in as well, Ian.
Yes, it does. And when we did the research for this, that we saw a very interesting statistic from the National Union of Students. This may have a political slant on it, but that suggests that the additional cost of living is around £13,000 a year for students living outside London. Now, traditionally that's going to be paid for by the parent, but some of it can be paid for by further student loans. So there is another loan scheme called the maintenance loan, which allows students to borrow up to £5,740 a year. A very similar situation to the student loan, so the tuition fee loan. The two things would go together and work in the same way, written off after 30 years, linked to inflation, and only repaid linked to earnings. So all those things factor in, but the fact is this loan is not sufficient to meet the cost of living during the university days. So as a parent, I'm certainly thinking, how do I make up that shortfall? And that's a key thing.
That's where I guess you need to start thinking about it a little bit early. We'll talk about some of these things in just a second. But if the bank of mum and dad, Ian, is going to be called on, it might be worth, even if the child's running around now playing with toys, to be thinking about how that you can pay for their education in, goodness me, what could be 16, 17 years' time.
Definitely, and I think anybody would say that the earlier you start with this sort of thing, longer term savings, chipping a little bit away each month, has a huge impact over a longer term. So the earlier you can start to fund and save for this, the better. But the key thing is, don't use that savings to immediately pay for things like tuition fees and so on. Let the loans do their job there, and use this side of it to help the child with the cost of living.
We're going to talk about some of the ways that you can help save right now for your child's education, no matter how young they might be, in today's Money Matters in association with the Vernon Building Society here on Pure 107.8 FM.
Money Matters on Pure 107.8 FM, brought to you in association with the Vernon Building Society, Stockport's first choice for mortgages, savings and financial services. Find out more at www.thevernon.co.uk.
I'm joined in the studio today by Ian Keeling from the Vernon Building Society, and Money Matters is all about the cost of university. Ian, we're talking about how students can get loans to pay off their tuition fees and also maintenance grants. Inevitably, some will find part-time working becomes a reality too, just for those cost of living expenses.
Yes, so we talked about trying to bridge that gap between the actual cost of living and the amount you can get in a maintenance loan. Certain research recently has suggested 59% of students are in some sort of part-time work, which is good in one sense, but in other senses you see certain universities, Cambridge and Oxford, would recommend their students don't engage in anything other than their studying.
So it's something that families, if they can, will want to help out with. And of course, much like anything, a long-term financial commitment like getting our children through further education, you can never start planning for that too early.
No, and I think if you're dealing with very young children as well, if you're dealing over longer terms, then it's certainly worth considering longer-term investments, the sort of investments that go into perhaps stock market-related type things, unit trusts. You upset perhaps that there's some fluctuation in value. These things go down as well as up. However, over the longer term, the growth potential is much greater than cash. So that's worth considering and taking some advice on. If you're uncomfortable with that idea of fluctuating, then simply going into some sort of tax-efficient savings account, a cash savings account such as an ISA would be sensible.
They certainly grow up quickly. I remember a friend of mine when he had his daughter, his first daughter, who's just about to start secondary school now, which is making all of us feel very old. He decided, and maybe this is because he had a bit of a misspent youth, he wouldn't put a savings account for her future in her name because he was concerned she could then spend it on whatever she liked when she turned 18. Instead, he put her savings account in his name. It gives him a bit more control, he thinks, about how that money can be spent.
Yeah, that's up to the individual. I certainly I tend to agree. I think that's quite sensible, and I think We talk about experience, perhaps his misspent youth, but I recall a schoolmate of mine who received a fairly substantial inheritance just before he went to university at the age of 18, and I think he left with nothing other than cirrhosis of the liver, which was a terrible sort of story, a real life lesson for him. But definitely do it. If you do it in your own name, then you've got that control.
For balance, he would say I led him astray. Let's get back to tuition fees. We were talking of them in the first part of today's Money Matters. It's very clear that for students, that they have options in terms of whether they pay them up front, whether they pay them over a longer period of time through their taxation when they earn over £21,000. There may be some parents, though, and this may be through pension pots, it may be through a house that has got equity over the course of the years. They may have this pot of money, £30,000. They may be thinking, well, why don't I just pay the tuition fees off for my son, for my daughter, and then they can start their life debt-free?
Yes. So, a lot of people would think, this is sensible. I've got the money, I can pay the fees, and that will save my my nearest and dearest having this debt hanging over them. A lot of caution is needed here. Again, coming back to the point that because this debt is written off after 30 years, and because this debt is only repayable if someone's earning over £21,000 a year, the majority of students are not expected to repay all of the money that they borrowed. And because of that, it doesn't make sense to pay it all up front. I guess what we're really saying is no one's got a crystal ball. Is someone going to come out of university? Are they going to go into a very high-paid job? I guess we'd all hope that for our children, but the reality may be something different. So the best thing to do is hang back. If you've got that money, keep it. And use it for other things. So let the loan kick in, see where the employment is going, and if someone's going to be a barrister and earn money, then it may well be best to pay back this loan. But if not, then it may well be best to support the child in other ways. So let the loan sit to one side and be repaid by the as you say, through the taxation system. So it's deducted from pay, and then use the money to assist the child perhaps to buy their first house or to buy the car or whatever, because there's so many other challenges facing young people.
Each circumstance is going to be different in every family listening to this across Stockport. There is some good advice online and even online calculators where you can try and get a kind of a more sense about your individual circumstances. Yeah,
we had a play with a calculator on the Money Saving Expert website, which it allows you to change parameters, so how much you borrow in the tuition fees and what your starting salary might be, works a few assumptions on how that salary would increase each year and inflation, etc. And it will give a guide as to whether is it worthwhile paying these fees, or actually can you see how you would benefit by not paying them and allowing the loan to be borrowed in full.
We also spoke in the first part of today's Money Matters about the maintenance grants. Now, these are designed to help the students not just meet their tuition fees, but actually the cost of living at university. And the NUS would say that they don't actually meet the cost of living, but it may be, perhaps if somebody was staying at home, so their costs won't be quite as high as somebody who was living in halls of residence. It might actually be worth their while, and it is worth having a look at the details of this to get that maintenance loan anyway, even if it's not being spent.
It's an interesting one. As part of doing this research was I had that fed back to me that stay-at-home students who didn't have the costs and weren't paying the rent and the food, etc., were still borrowing this money, this maintenance loan, and taking the entitlement to it. Because the interest rate's low, because, again, it's written off after 30 years, and because, again, it is only repayable if they earn over a certain amount, then it seemed to make sense for them to take that to one side, put it into a cash-paying account, hopefully not spending it, and using it when they sort of graduate and they're thinking about moving into a home or buying the first car or whatever, then they've got that. Now, the difference, I guess, is that if we say, anyone buying their first car maybe is going to take a loan to do it, if I don't pay that loan, then my car's going to be taken back off me, and I'm going to be incurring all sorts of fees, etc., and people will be knocking on the door. With the maintenance loan through the student loan system, nobody's ever going to do that. It's taken through the taxation system, and it is only ever taken if I'm earning. So if I lost my job, I don't make any repayments. So that's why I see this is quite a sensible way to go. I guess, again, it's just consider your own individual circumstances and whether it suits to do that. It certainly isn't sensible to take it all and spend it all on nights out. That wouldn't make sense.
It's been fascinating to look through the details of something that has changed an awful lot since I went through the process and no doubt will change again. But this is the situation we have at the moment regarding tuition fees and maintenance loans, and it really has been interesting to talk about it today. There's also plenty more information online. We've spoken about the Money Saving Expert website. There is plenty other government-backed websites as well. Make sure you're looking at something that is independent and get the information that you need before making these decisions. And as Ian was saying, well worth planning all this early, even if your children now are just going to primary school. Believe me, a blink of the eye and they'll be leaving secondary school and there'll be time to think about all of this. Ian Keeling from the Vernon Building Society, thank you so much indeed for your time on today's Money Matters.
Thank you.
Money Matters on Pure 107.8 FM, brought to you in association with the Vernon Building Society, Stockport's first choice for mortgages, savings and financial services. Find out more at www.thevernon.co.uk.